And it's moving slow.
Okay.
Can everybody see it?
Yes.
All right. So for case study 1, what we thought the principal course of action should be was that he should have approached the case with extreme caution. He was bombarded with information from the dean of students that a star athlete and relative of an influential member of the Board of Education has been caught cheating. The student Bobby was caught plagiarizing his older brother's social studies project from 2 years ago. When the teacher confronted Bobby, he admitted to the accusation. His confession plays a key role in the proceedings of Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson is concerned because the teacher plans to give Bobby a failing grade, which is supported by the student handbook. However, the concern comes in because Bobby's relative is a huge supporter of the school's athletics department and the community. If Bobby fails his class and has to attend summer school, then he would miss the baseball tournament. The principal fears negative backlash from Bobby's relative. The teacher wants to hold Bobby accountable by giving him a failing grade because of what the student handbook states, which is, as a part of the school's policy to maintain standards of personal honesty, cheating of any kind may require a failing grade by the teacher. Both Bobby and his mother signed a document earlier in the year acknowledging the contents of the student handbook. While Mr. Davidson's course of action should begin with an investigation of the situation, when a student is involved in a disciplinary issue, he or she must be offered due process. And in due process, a student must be given proper notice of the charges and be offered a fair and impartial hearing, which we cited from the text.
The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states, "No person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law." Procedural due process. The policies, rules, and regulations are applied in a fair manner. Officials meet procedural concerns when they follow prescribed constitutional steps in matters involving student discipline to ensure fundamental fairness. In the case Goss versus Lopez, 1975, laws were put in place to ensure students receive a proper hearing when being charged. These hearings must include the following: an oral or written notice of the charges against the student, an explanation of the evidence the authorities have to support the charges, and the opportunity for the student to present his or her side of the problem.
The procedural due process is the policies, rules, and regulations are applied in a fair manner. Officials meet procedural concerns when they follow prescribed constitutional steps in matters involving student discipline to ensure fundamental fairness. Am I on the right? No, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong slide. I apologize. I'm trying to do it on my iPad next to it, and I was trying to follow her. I'm sorry. Substantive due process. Substantive concerns are met when officials can demonstrate that they had a valid reason to take necessary administrative action against the student. They must also demonstrate that the methods they used during disciplinary proceedings were reasonable. Bobby's substantive due process was not violated because the rule regarding cheating was made clear in the student handbook. Both he and his mother signed a document acknowledging the contents of the handbook, which included the rule and the consequences for cheating and plagiarism.
Okay, so going into our ethical paradigms, the first one was justice. One key component of justice is fairness and equality or equity. So in this situation, justice plays a big part. It must come fairly and be dealt with equity. The plagiarism relates to Bobby's incident because in order to be fair, this paradigm relates to Bobby's incident because in order to be fair, his teacher and Mr. Davidson must look at the whole picture. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, fair can be defined by marked by impartiality and honesty, free from self-interest, prejudice, or favoritism. So when you think about that, Mr. Davidson would be he would have to charge Bobby with the cheating and the plagiarism and actually give him the failing grade, because the student handbook supports that. The student handbook clearly stated that cheating may result in a failing grade. He would not be serving justice to Bobby if he gave him a lesser punishment in an attempt to keep peace with involved stakeholders such as Bobby's relative or his baseball team or his parents. So giving him a lesser punishment would go against the meaning of being fair. He would be showing favoritism and impartiality. Latoya, you can go to the next slide. So the next part of justice was about being the process of arbitrary and capricious. So according to case study 1, the handbook stated, we've talked about this before, that cheating may require a failing grade by the teacher. So based on this statement, Mr. Davidson should allow the teacher to give Bobby a failing grade. However, since the failing grade will cause Bobby to fail the class, require him to take summer school, and cause him to miss the summer baseball tournament, there's probably going to be some backlash from his family and other people involved. So this is where the terms arbitrary and capricious really come into play. In the court system, when a judge makes a decision without reasonable grounds or adequate consideration of the circumstances, it is said to be arbitrary and capricious and can be invalidated by an appellate court at that ground. So when Bobby admitted to cheating, he explained that he plagiarized his older brother's work because he was so busy with baseball and he did not have time to complete the project. The circumstances of Bobby's case show a student who is under pressure and felt like he could not balance school and athletics. Also, Bobby and his parents may come with the argument that the statement in the student handbook is very vague and general. Therefore, they could have the argument that it's not specific enough. And as the other group spoke about, is it fair for him to have a failing grade that could require summer school, whereas another student may have a failing grade on one test and just drop a letter grade. So there was a federal court case, MKV versus School Board of Brevard County, and that illustrated what can happen if a policy statement is not explicit enough when being handled. And the question is, does the statement in the student handbook give enough specific information to justify Bobby's punishment? And like I was just talking about, it could be such a lesser punishment in a different situation. Him going to summer school and missing his baseball tournament is quite a punishment for one assignment. This would have an extreme effect on Bobby in this case. So Mr. Davidson has to consider if the statement is arbitrary and capricious before charging Bobby. If Mr. Davidson is being fair and just when charging Bobby, he will allow the teacher to give Bobby a failing grade. However, if Mr. Davidson does not want Bobby's family to fight back, he must consider if the grounds for punishment are fair, if what the student handbook was fair itself. So our group was a little bit torn on what he should do based on the handbook. Yes, he should give him the punishment, but was the handbook stated in a proper way to begin with?
The second ethical paradigm is care. Loyalty and trust is one of the key components of care. And Jane Barton, the social studies teacher, trusts that Mr. Davidson will uphold the student handbook's ban on cheating and plagiarism. Ms. Barton brings a union representative to the meeting she has with Mr. Davidson to reiterate her expectation of loyalty and administrative backing of the published school rules and consequences. When we look at care and concern, due to the close ties between the school and Mr. Michaels, who is Bobby's uncle, there's great concern regarding the potential impact of the disciplinary action applied to Bobby and its effects on the relationship between Mr. Michaels and the athletics program. The ramifications of the infraction and assigned consequence could strain the financial connections and relationships for another department within the school. The Dean of Students enacted shared decision-making to ensure the best interest of all parties. When confronted with a disciplinary infraction, the Dean of Students then consulted with the principal. The principal met with the teacher and her union representative and then spoke to the superintendent, who advised him that he had the final say in the situation. Again, the relationship between the school and Mr. Michaels complicates what should be a very cut and dry case. Mr. Davidson has to carefully decide on his course of action in order to prevent irreparable damage to the relationship between the teacher and the school, as well as the relationship between the stakeholder and the school. When we looked at attention and support, we really focused on the discipline aspect of it, because the cut and dry part of it is he cheated, he should receive a failing grade. But when we look at the athletic portion of it, we found a case that was against the Missouri State High School Activities Association in 1982. And in that case, the Eighth Circuit stated that a student's interest in participating in a single year of interscholastic athletics amounts to a mere expectation rather than a constitutionally protected claim of entitlement. So he, even though his family may be upset with him not being able to play, if the principal does decide to go through with the punishment, it's not mandatory that he plays.
The third paradigm is critique. I also talked about it being a moral issue and stealing, and all the people that it affected. This kind of hits home with my district, because we have it's all based on your last name type thing in my district. So different people get, and I mean, maybe that's in other places too, but I've only worked in this district, and even though it's very hard to follow through with, the principal must use his or her power to ensure the student handbook policies are upheld, as is the policies and laws of the district and state. The principal should react the same to the situation, no matter the person's last name and social class. The incident should require consequences based on their actions. Students of all social classes should be upheld to the policy manual. So I guess my thought there was, if the person was in a lower class in a trailer park next to the school, would they still get the same punishment as Bobby? It may not be as much of a deal with that, but it still should be the same. The following rules apply to any student who is on, this is in my, school or district property, who's in attendance at school or any school-related activity. It can be en route on the school bus or district vehicle. Then I went to my district human resources policy manual, and this would be a level 1 incident. And you can read about what level 1's just, it has different things, but I highlighted that it was cheating on examinations or classroom assignments. And then the possible sanctions to be applied, if it's a level 1, could include but are not limited to. And then I highlighted withdrawal of privileges, exclusion from participation in extracurricular activities, which was my district's policy.
And then we have the fourth ethical paradigm, which was profession. Accountability for student academic. By Jane selecting to ensure that Bobby receives a failing grade, she is ensuring that he's being accountable for his academics, while also even though it wasn't necessarily a success with him receiving a failing grade, it supports what was in the student handbook regarding cheating and plagiarism. Model principles of self-awareness and reflective practice, transparency, and ethical behavior. I think Jane is being ethical by following what is in the handbook and planning to grade with a failing grade, since it clearly is stated and acknowledged by the student and parent. She seems to be reflective as well as transparent by bringing her union representative with her to meet with her principal. Safeguarding the values of democracy, equity, and diversity. Jane is safeguarding the values of democracy, equity, and diversity because she's ensuring that what is agreed upon in the student handbook is being followed by recognizing that work look familiar and then investigating. She did not assume, but did check with the student to inquire about the work, and regardless of the fact she had taught his brother and possibly knew of who his uncle was, she was still going to be fair in the grading process. Evaluating potential moral and legal consequences. I feel like we discussed in our group as well, although Jane is holding to her morals, it appears that the principal is checking with the superintendent to make sure of how the situation should be handled. And I said that just based off of the conversation that the principal had with the dean, and how it seemed like the dean was being more influencing towards, not being so harsh with the consequence because of who his uncle was. But I did also state the superintendent is not stating that there will be legal consequences, but rather suggesting that the principal watch carefully over the decision based on the influence of the student that the student uncle has. Cheating is unethical, and students will receive consequences ranging from failing grades to suspension and others as measured by educational institutions. Best interest of students. While the dean may agree that he has the student best interest in mind because of not wanting him to attend summer school or not wanting him to miss summer baseball tournament by attending summer school, and it helps, and also looking at the fact that it helps with them earning scholarship, it doesn't withhold being in his best interest to cheat when it is necessary because of scheduling conflicts. It would not be in the best interest of other students to also know that students involved in sports are being allowed to receive passing grades or participate in tournaments when they've been known to cheat. And those are just our references. I'm going to stop
Okay.
sharing.
All right. So let me, I'm going to share my screen, and I have to pull this up real quick. So give me just a second. This is quite interesting. And it makes you not only think about this situation, but to think about the, just to think about the whole thing about your student handbook and how clear it is, and what you think the, the consequences for things. And you do have your code of conduct book from your district, and the code of conduct book and the student handbook should be very clear about what charges should be and what consequences should be. But a lot of thought needs to go into that, because like the other two folks have shared, it's not those consequences are not only going to affect Bobby, but they're going to affect a lot of other people as well. Let's hear from this last group. So this is the video group from group one, the video from group one, and Lori is will be leading that, but I'm going to play their video. They've recorded theirs, so let's watch this and see how it goes. Okay.
Hey, this is group number one, and we're doing case study number one. Tracy, Lori, Candace, and Takesha.
Okay. What should the principal's course of action be in Bobby's case? Number one, he should talk to the teacher and show the teacher that he supports her in her decisions for what Bobby's consequences should be. Number two, the teacher meets with Bobby and the baseball coach to discuss the situation. There should be athletic consequences. Most athletes sign a code of conduct or a contract saying that they're going to follow school policies. So this way the baseball coach understands what's going on with Bobby and in the classroom. Number three, the teacher contacts the parents. This, depending on what the parents' reaction is to the news, the teacher will determine the next steps. If the parents are on board and understand the consequence, basically the buck stops here. But if the parents want to fight the teacher on what Bobby's consequences could be, then you have to talk about alternative consequences. So the parents will schedule a meeting with the parents, the teacher, the coach, the dean of students. While that's underway of scheduling those events, the principal needs to make sure he contacts the superintendent again to give him an update to let him know what the consequences could be and that the parents are coming in. So if something happens and the situation blows up, that he is aware, especially with the uncle being part of the school board. Number 6 is we're going to have a meeting with Bobby, his parents, the teacher, the coach, the dean of students, and the principal to discuss the situation and the consequences. There could be an alternative assignment that could happen. Bobby may have to take the 0. All this depends on what happens in this meeting. And number 7, the principal really needs to revisit and possibly revise the policies for next school year. In their handbook, it said the policy is may result in a 0. That keyword being may can make the situation make or break because it needs to be cut and dry on what should happen. Also, that needs to be addressed on how the grades are weighted. With this assignment being more than 50% of the grade, that's a lot of weight for a grade, and he needs to go back and talk to his teachers about how to weight grades.
Oh, I'm doing due process, sorry. I already forgot. There are 2 types of due process. The first one is substantive. And with substantive due process, you're looking at the 14th Amendment, and it protects a parent's right to direct the educational upbringing of their child. So in this case, ultimately, the parents could choose for Bobby to not go to summer school, which means he would have to retake the course next year. So even though that probably the recommendation would be for him to go to summer school and miss that tournament, if they chose for him not to, he could retake the course next year. Procedural due process has to do with you have to require, or it's required that you give notice to the person who the infraction is against. They have to be given the opportunity to be heard. You can hear their side of the story. And then the decision has to be done by a neutral decision maker. In this case, if the parents question the original decision, then, and they have to have a follow-up meeting, then that's when the parents, the teacher, the principal, and Bobby can all meet. They can listen to his side of the story, and then the principal, being the unbiased person, would make the final decision.
Standards of arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary and capricious means doing something according to one's will or caprice, which is a whim, and therefore conveying a notion of a tendency to abuse the position of power. A rule is arbitrary if it is not supported by logic or the necessary factors. A rule is capricious if it is adopted without thought or reason or is irrational. In this case, if the principal decides to not enforce the rule about cheating, his decision could be considered arbitrary and capricious, since he will be making the decision against the rule, which could be considered an abuse of his power. The 4 ethical paradigms as they relate or not to this case. First is justice, second, care, third, critique, and 4, profession. The first ethical paradigm is justice. Justice is ensuring that the appropriate punishment is applied to the violation of the code of conduct. The code of conduct in this case stated that the student may end up with a failing grade. The teacher and the principal must work together to ensure that justice is served. It is the principal's duty to act according to the code of conduct. The parents and student willingly signed this document. Justice deals with fairness, equity, and freedom, and arbitrary and capricious. The questions that the principal needs to consider, particularly in this case, is first, is there a law or policy that is correlated with this? In this instance, the cheating policy of the school directly correlates. And the second question to consider is, how should the law or policy be implemented? In this particular case, it should be implemented as written. In other words, Bobby would receive a 0, and that would be the end of it.
The second ethical paradigm is care. The care ethic challenged school decision makers to address certain values such as loyalty and trust. It calls for school leaders to show care and concern and connection with all stakeholders in solving moral dilemmas. This moral dilemma is about Bobby cheating in class and risking his future. So the principal has to show loyalty, trust, and empowerment to his faculty, because once he loses trust with his faculty, then he's kind of lost rule of the school. He also has to have relationships, collaboration, and shared decision-making and connections, which is when he's speaking with the superintendent and asks for advice. While also he needs to show concern and connection with the teacher and the parents. Questions that he should be addressed in thinking about care is, will Bobby benefit? Who will benefit from what I decide? Well, hopefully Bobby will learn a lesson long term so that he doesn't do it again in college when he hopefully gets that scholarship, because he cheats in college and plagiarizes, then he will lose his scholarship and his chance to play baseball. Also, again, what are the long and short term effects of his decision? Well, in the short term, Bobby can fail class, he has to take the 0, go to summer school, and he misses the tournament. But in the long term, again, hopefully Bobby will learn his lesson and set the precedent of the school to follow school policies.
The third ethical paradigm, critique. When looking at critique, the first thing we need to look at is incident versus offense type versus action. So first, the incident that actually occurred was Bobby cheating. Most counties have a policy reflecting levels of offenses and actions or consequences that go along with those actions or consequences for those actions. It's important that the incident matches up to the offense and the consequence. Second thing to consider, outcomes and effects of their decisions before they're made. Power versus privilege. In this instant, the principal needs to ensure that the decision that he makes is not one based on privilege because of who Bobby is, or utilizing his power to override a decision that the teacher made and giving him a 0, but ensuring that he follows the policy accordingly. The next, rules exist for a purpose. We have rules, and we need to ensure that they are promoted, because the promotion of those create justice and order, and they should be followed. Following the principle that you want others to follow. The principal in this role as an administrator sets the tone and the precedent. Yes, sticks his principles and let the chips fall where they may, even though parents or uncle may get involved. Lastly, exercises power in a way that supports policy and its staff. You cannot make it personal, and you cannot show partiality due to political reasons.
The fourth ethical paradigm is profession. Professional educators are ultimately the ones responsible for student academic and social success. They should always have the best interest of the students in mind when making decisions. In this case, it may be difficult for Bobby to see that it's in his best interest when this decision is made. However, Bobby will benefit, as we said before, let's see, hang on. Okay. Bobby will realize that maybe in the short term that he's losing something that he really wants to do. However, he would not benefit by making an exception to the rule, because then in the long term, as we said before, he might do this again in something when there's higher stakes involved. Okay, he needs to learn young that there are consequences to your actions, no matter who you are or who your family is. The next is you should always model the principles of self-awareness, reflective practice, transparency, and ethical behavior. Specifically with the transparency, the principal has, or the teacher has met with Bobby, and Bobby has admitted to doing it, and he knew it was wrong. And then the teacher will meet with his parents, and they're going to know right up front exactly what happened, what the consequence is, and so there is all transparency through that entire process. When you consider ethical behavior is knowing the policy and sticking to it. Okay, so as an educator, you can't just make decisions based on whether you like the child or who they are or who their family is. It's very important to be ethical and apply the policy to everyone equally. He is also, we're looking at being reflective in your practice, because we're going to encourage the revisiting of the wording of the policy and the grading practices of the teachers. We had questions about instead of the policy saying may give a 0, we're going to encourage that the policy read will give a 0, so that there's no ambiguity at all. And as we said before, the grading practices of the teachers should be looked at and perhaps be made uniform throughout the school. And then the last thing educators should do is consider and evaluate the potential moral and legal consequences of the decision making. In this case, the legal consequences we feel like are pretty cut and dry. They signed the policy, knew that cheating would give you a 0. He admitted to cheating, and so therefore, those are the consequences. The moral consequences to realize is that sometimes doing the right thing could be the hard thing. And in this case, it may be difficult for Bobby to deal with missing the tournament and having to go to summer school and all those kinds of things. But again, it's a decision that needs to be made, and it's one that the educators need to realize is the moral thing to do, and that you're setting a good example for Bobby.
So in closing, our highlights. As a principal, it's important to follow the code of conduct, support your staff, and be sure all your policies are clear, fair, and known by all staff, students, and parents.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, let's see here.
Dr. Whitaker, while you're doing that, I did want to mention that my son plays baseball on a college team, and his one of the players on there, his father played professional baseball. And he's retired now, and he went back to school and finished his degree, and he's a high school teacher, and he's been a baseball coach. So I presented the case to him because I thought he might see it in a different way, because he went and played in the major leagues, and he got a scholarship to Georgia to play, and and all that kind of stuff. And now he's a high school teacher and a baseball coach. But he was very adamant that Bobby should get the consequence of a 0, and that there's probably an athletic policy that says he's going to have consequences for that as well. But he was, and I said, well, what if he misses the tournament and he doesn't get a scholarship? And I was feeling all sorry for him, and he goes, well, tough, he made a bad decision. I mean, he was really very cut and dry about the whole thing. And so I thought that was an interesting, because I was kind of feeling weepy for Bobby. And and when I was talking to the group, I said, maybe we should give him another option, or something. And then Takesha said no, because then you're setting the precedent that you have to do. The teacher would have to do that for everybody who ever failed. And why should the teacher be punished and have to do more work just because a kid cheated? And so that's what we kept coming back to, was we didn't want to offer a separate thing for him, because that just set the precedent that you were going to have to do it for everybody for as long as you went. So anyway.
So most of your districts have a code of conduct book, which hits all, most of the really big things. And then you have a student handbook that maybe some things are put into that handbook that you've experienced before, or different things like that. But I think that it's just really important. And I am I think this last statement that you all made in that last presentation, doing the right thing could be the hard thing to do. It's fairly easy for us to all sit here and talk about that. But if Bobby were your son, or if you were the principal that was on that firing line, it would be a very emotional thing for you to have to deal with. And not that I'm saying that, you should favor, with Bobby, because I think that our young people today, our whole society is weepy over, every little thing that they don't get to do. But him not getting to do that now, if that would pay off in his future, where like you said, the stakes would be higher, it would be well worth it. But I think that sometimes we also have to, when you're thinking about those rules and things that you put, I definitely think that in the handbook that may sort of gives all the different sides a chance to say, well, it says may, and so you just don't like him, or, different thing. It allows more perspectives, I guess, to come into the situation. So the clearer your rules and consequences and things can be, the better. And every situation is going to have sort of its own light to it. This situation had the rich uncle that was contributing to the school and everything, but different situations will have different lights to them. But the other thing is this: sometimes you want to make sure that that the punishment meets the crime, that all of those things line up. But there should be a severe punishment for cheating, because we know what that could be down the road and where the stakes are higher. But I wonder about, him failing the whole course for cheating on one assignment. So I do think that the grading policies and the practices should be, that should be discussed somewhat, because it's like you don't have to chop off somebody's hand. They need to have a consequence, and they need to serve that. And like you said, there could be some athletic things. He could have to miss some games in that season, or whatever. But I find that that's pretty harsh, and maybe if that is going to be the school's policy, that if you cheat on any assignment, you're going to fail the whole course and have to attend summer school, that should be very clearly communicated with students. And I think that would be a responsibility for teachers in the classroom to reemphasize that, when you're giving assignments and so forth, so that you're not just setting them up for failure, So I think we have to be careful with that. But anyway, I think all of you did a great job with that. You certainly hit on all of the major things that you needed to talk about, the due process, both substantive and procedural, and knowing the difference between those. And then those paradigms, the fairness and justice and care and profession and all of that. It's really a lot to think about. And when you are in a situation and faced with all of that, you're going to hear everybody's side to it, but then it's going to come down to the decision that you make. And so you really want to feel grounded in those ethical paradigms of the decision that you're making. And I think when you can make that clear to parents or to your staff or whoever, the decisions that you've made and why you've had to make them, if you are really making an ethical decision, I think everybody will see that. The transparency of that will speak volumes for you. So, there's going to be a million situations that you're never going to make everybody happy, and so you can't even think about that in anything in a position of leadership. You've got to lead in an ethical way. You've got to be able to do that with structure and consistency, and so forth. So just try to keep that in mind, that when you're faced with tough situations, to make sure that you're following that due process, making the charges and having the hearings and hearing everybody's side and doing all of those due process things that you need to do, because that will get you in trouble if you leave any of that out. It will make you not be able to give the consequences that clearly should be in order if you mess up in how you handle it. So knowing how to handle those things is most important. But then, make those decisions, make sure that you're making the ethical decisions, that you have followed that. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you realize in the middle of a situation that, maybe the staff and I do need to have some more conversations about grading, and maybe we do need to, look at how things are worded in the handbook and things like that. You're going to have to make the best decision that you can. And sometimes you might find yourself where you have to err a little bit, towards the weepy side, because of how you have set it up, how you have that wording and so forth. If it causes too many loopholes to be there, then how can you fairly say, no, it's, So anyway, just you've done a great job with this again, and I hope that you've really had a chance to reflect and learn some things about that, and how you will have to follow through and handle some things.
Dr. Whitaker,
Yep.
I wondered if you had heard of the case in Spartanburg District 5 right now.
I did see your link, and I didn't have a chance to look at that today, but I am going to look at that.
It really hit home after our last case study, and then it hitting right here close to home. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. Can I share that link with the class?
Did I send it to you? I don't even remember.
You did send it to me. I just
Okay.
saw it this afternoon. I didn't have a chance to look at it.
Yeah, it was in the paper. So that's the link from the paper. It just, because of this class, made me really think about it.
Okay. Is it okay with you if I share it with the class?
Sure.
Okay. I'll share it with the rest of you. So it'll give you another incident to sort of reflect on with this as well, because and there is no there's just not a blueprint to give you just because you get this degree and you get into that job. It was just like when you started teaching, every day is going to be, I spoke to one of my former teachers who is in her first year as an assistant principal this year, and every day is a new day. And I mean, things just come up that you never would even dream about. And you just can't have an answer for everything. Like everything's going to be black and white. So, yeah, I'll share that with the class. That would be great. And anyway, real quick, I know we're out of time. Does anybody have any burning questions about the skip? Any burning questions about that? Everybody moving along okay with it? All right. There were just a couple of things that Dr. Lamb mentioned to us last night, to just some guidelines, a couple of things to mention to you. I'll just send you that in an email. And your next case study is case study 4, and it's all around special ed, which is your reading for this week. And I just want to share with you real quick, and I'm going to post this as well for you. But let me see here. Nope. Hold on. Let's see where it is. I'm going to post this for you. This is sort of an outline of the chapter. You need to read this chapter. If you've been skimming or doing anything or not reading or whatever with your chapters, reading the headlines and skimming through it, this is a chapter you really need to read. And so this just follows the chapter. You need to read the whole thing. I mean, basically, I think it starts on 168, but maybe from page 170 to 95. You really need to read this chapter. And so I've made this little outline. It just follows the chapter exactly, but it might give you can look back at this outline and try to remember the main points of those different sections, because EC law is important. Next week, your reading is on HR and teacher evaluations. And, teacher evaluations are mandated by the state. You're told how many evaluations each teacher has to have. You have a document you have to use. HR, most districts have their own system of how you're going to follow through HR and hire people and everything. So a lot of those two things are just a whole lot of following the procedures set before you. But EC, you're going to have to know this stuff on your campus yourself as you deal with things and deal in meetings, EC meetings with parents, IEP meetings and different things. You're going to have to know and just be sure. Now, you might have a great EC teacher and you might rely on that EC teacher to conduct the meetings and setting them up and, doing everything according to the timelines and all of that kind of stuff. But you know what? The bottom line is it falls on you. If something's not done right, it's going to fall on you. So you need to make sure you know that. Don't just rely on somebody else to know it. You make sure that you know the ins and outs of the legalities of EC. And this is something that will put your name in the paper. It could cause you to lose your job. It's that and money are just two big things. So you want to make sure that you know what you're dealing with here and that you can handle that well. So I'll post this. I'll send you an email with just those couple of tips that Dr. Lamb sort of shared with us about the skip. I think maybe Dr. Stedman has read a few papers and he had a couple of new tips he wanted to share out. And so I'll just send that to you in an email and we'll go ahead and finish up. So does anybody else have anything that you need to share tonight before we close?
I have a quick question about case study 4.
Yes.
I know it says that it's in Chile, but
Yes.
are we just going to pretend like it's in the United States and use our laws?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I figured. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, it is. I noticed that too. And the laws may be different there, but yes, I want you to follow our laws and what you know about that, about dealing with EC according to those structures. But yes, so that will be an interesting one for you to do. And any other questions or anything before we close? Okay. I'll get all of those things posted in our Zoom 8-week. Last time when we did our presentations, I posted your individual things. I did record our session tonight, and so I'll just post everything and that outline that I had and everything. You can print that and use it as you need to. Next week's class, Dr. Zions is going to be holding the class with the two groups together. But if you need me for anything, you need any feedback and stuff, just let me know. I'll be checking the grade center and making sure I'm keeping up with your grades. I'll get everybody's presentation. There's no need for all of you to individually submit your presentations, okay? I will give you your grades. And I don't know what happened. Chris sent me a note, and when I went in, there were several people who didn't have a grade, but I was pretty sure that I had put those grades in for everybody. So I apologize if anybody else has been looking at that. I don't really know what happened, but I will go in tonight and put all of your grades in for your presentations tonight. So
it's all good.
Yep, I know, but I'm like, what? Because I saw it last week. I was out of town, but I saw where you had sent me the email about that, and I was upset about that, but I couldn't get to the full grade center until I got back into my internet. But anyway, so anyway,